Welcome to Just SA, the Climate Justice Sessions. My name is Sintle Nell, and on this special episode, we're joined by Dimakatso Sefatsa. She's an attorney with the Center for Environmental Rights, CER. We're having a conversation around rights, justice, law, and how we strengthen climate action through legal empowerment for communities and by communities. Dimakatso, welcome to Just SA, the Climate Justice Sessions. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me, Zintle. I'm doing well.
Okay.
It's been a busy year, but you know what? I'm glad that it's going well, and I'm ready for December. Let me put it that way.
We're ready for December to land and to
yes,
arrive.
please.
Sure. So thank you again for joining us. And I wonder again, just to set the tone for the episode, please could you share about the work that you do, and particularly for the Center of Environmental Rights, what you guys are about and what fuels that work?
Okay. So I'm an attorney at CER. CER is a non-profit organization and law clinic. We've got our offices in Cape Town and Johannesburg. And we consider ourselves activist lawyers. And that means that we use the law to assist or help civil society organizations and communities to realize their right to a healthy environment, which is the constitutional right. We do this through litigation, advocacy, and by providing support and training. And we've got like 4 programs. We've got mining, we've got pollution and climate change, we've got corporate accountability and transparency, and also activist support and training. So that is like very briefly who I am and what we do at the center. So
when we talk about environmental rights, it's such a broad concept, right? And it feels like you're lawyer activists that are in the space, but what does that actually mean? When someone says you have environmental rights, what are they and what do they actually mean within the context of South Africa?
Okay, so for me to kind of respond, I always feel like I need to say, guys, environmental rights are human rights.
Okay.
Because sometimes when you say we work around environmental rights, people think we just protect the trees. But then we forget about, like, what does the tree mean for human beings,
Exactly.
right? What does protecting the water mean for people?
Yes.
So I think I just want to just say environmental rights are human rights. And human rights are those rights that people have by the virtue of the fact that they're human, right? And in South Africa, you find those rights in the Bill of Rights, such things like the right to life, the right to equality, and of course, Section 24, which essentially says that everybody's got a right to a healthy, to an environment that is not harmful to their health and well-being. So there's a duty upon like government to actually make and actually apply laws, right? And the laws are supposed to be protecting not just the environment, but also the people. So prevent harm to the community and also the environment. And then corporates are supposed to then follow environmental rights. And when they actually don't follow the environmental rights, they're supposed to then be held accountable in terms of that. So one, it means that government are supposed to not only make the laws, but also apply the laws that protect the people and the environment. And they do this by reducing pollution, and then protecting them from climate impacts. Secondly, corporations are supposed to then apply environmental rights, so meaning comply with environmental rights. And then get authorization for activities. So that means not just any business can just go and just do something that's going to impact the environment. But one way that Section 24 in practice would mean that you need to actually get authorization to then kind of do certain activities. And when you do something that damages the environment, then you need to put in place like measures or fix it or remediate the impacts that you have done. Secondly, I think what also happens is that communities are supposed to be meaningfully consulted in decisions that actually impact them, and that flows directly because, for example, if a company is going to come and say, hey, we're going to actually have a mine here, communities need to be part of that decisions. And I think also what's important is that decisions should also not only just think about present needs, because a lot of the times it's development because as a country presently with the certain things that we need, right?
Correct.
Like think about electricity. But also we need to think about the rights of children or the rights of future generations. So what is very important about Section 24 is actually it's an intergenerational right.
Sure.
right? And we need to consider that. And I think also what I want to just mention is that everybody's got the right to then to protect the environment. So then you can actually take court action just to say, I want to protect the environment. And when I say environment, is not just environment, right? Remember, in the environment in relation to people.
Okay.
So I want to protect the water because maybe I'm actually using it as part of I'm a small scale like farmer. You know, I need the water. Or for example, especially in the high felds, people are getting sick because of the pollution there. So I would then take action to say, you need to put measures in place so that I as a community can, you know, be protected or at least exercise my right in terms of Section 24.
So Dimakatso, I think you've given us such a powerful start in understanding the work that CER does. But maybe, can you give us an overview of the legal framework that South Africans have in as far as environmental rights, what that looks like in context legally?
Okay. No, thank you so much, Cynthia. So I just want to start by saying that environmental rights are human rights. It's quite important to actually like say that and state that outright. And then in South Africa, of course, that is found in the Bill of Rights, right? And the Bill of Rights have rights such as equality, the right to life, and human rights are those rights that you have just by the fact that you're born human.
Okay.
And in practice, what I want to say is that this Section 24, which says you've got a right to an environment that is not harmful for your health and well-being, means that one, government is supposed to enact laws and also apply those laws to protect not just communities but also the environment. So not just people but environment from harm and also pollution. And that is done by, for example, building upon laws like the National Environmental Management Act. That is the environmental law in South Africa. And it essentially basically creates clear duties that, you know, companies and governments are responsible for to reduce, for example, pollution. When it comes to at what circumstances can mining companies or any, for example, development take place. And they do this through granting things like environmental authorization, right? Which allows then people to get permission to do an activity that would impact the environment.
So this would be the EIA.
Yes.
Environmental Impact Assessment.
Okay. Yes, and there's a very big part, and big part of that is public participation process. So communities are supposed to participate in decisions that will affect them. And then we have to be very clear that this is supposed to be meaningful, you know, participation. And then secondly, I think it's quite important then for corporates that flows from that is that then in terms of these laws, corporates can then also be held accountable, right? They have to follow environmental laws, and if they do something that actually can, like that badly impacts the environment, then they're responsible for actually, fixing, you know, the damage to the environment that is caused by the activities. And then of course, if they're going to do any activities, I think just to emphasize, they actually need to then have authorization, and you get environmental authorization through doing the EIA process. And it's not just like environmental authorization. Even if you're going to use water, you need a license to do that, right? Because you're doing something that's going to impact water. And then if you're a mine, you even need a mining right, which is like, I'm going to take something out of the ground. If you're a power station, if you're going to release something into the air, you need an air emission license. So all of those laws work together to give expression to Section 24 of the Constitution.
And maybe we could do a deep dive on that litigation aspect, because I think sometimes you've positioned yourselves as sort of these activists that are at the periphery of the law and engaging with the law rather. But maybe give us examples of some of the litigation cases that you've had or processes that are within your ambit when you work alongside communities.
Okay. So one of the things that, I'll mention just like basically just 3 cases, because I feel like I can go on forever like about that work, because I think it's actually quite important. So one of the cases that we've brought is called Tabamedzi. Tabamedzi case, yes. It's actually one of the first like climate change cases that we brought on behalf of clients. I think it was Earth Life. We brought it on behalf of Earth Life. And essentially, what used to happen is that as part of the process, right? So when a new development, in this case, it was a coal-fired power station, so it was a power station, you have to do like an EIA process,
Yes.
right? An EIA process says, okay, we're going to bring this project, and then how is it going to impact, your community and the environment before then, before government can make a decision whether to grant authorization or not.
So EIA first, before the project can go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So essentially what an EIA process says is like, okay, maybe I should have started there, but like essentially it says that, okay, so I'm going to bring a process, but then let's actually investigate how this project is going to impact
the environment and the
people, right?
Got you.
And obviously the impact can be both positive and negative, but the whole point of that is to actually investigate this and, and that's why it's very important to have public participation there, because then the community, because they live in that community, can then say, okay, you're bringing this project, but just be aware that, for example, we've got child-headed homes. How is this project going to impact them? Or, for example, we've got small-scale farmers or people that are using the river for fishing. How is that going to, actually impact the river? Because we know that power stations take a lot of water, right?
Yes.
And then, of course, it's going to be like, okay, you might be emitting, as part of like power stations also sort of impact the air and stuff.
Correct.
How is that going to impact me? So basically that's what it actually does, right? So that's the point of the EIA process. And then all of that information sits next to in front rather of the decision maker. And then they decide, okay, looking at like how this is going to bring the benefits, the negative part of it, what people are saying, should I be granting or not granting the authorization?
And just to backtrack, the decision maker would then be the government.
Would be the government.
Got you.
Of course, depending on what the activity is, going to be different people.
Okay.
In the case of a mine, it's normally DEMPA. I think they've changed. I was also DMRE, but Department of Mineral Resources
and Energy.
I think now it's energy, not anymore. I think now it's petroleum, because energy is now standing on its own.
Oh yes, with the DEE. Yes.
Yeah, because I always
all these acronyms.
And I have to be careful because I use that quite a bit. And then, of course, you've got the Department of Environment, was it Forestry and Fisheries?
Okay.
And then, of course, Department of Water. So different activities might require different authorizations. But maybe for now, let's just say, in this case, we're only focusing on the environmental authorization. Maybe just to say something also about environmental authorizations, I like to think of it as like, the permission for you to do something that's going to impact the environment, right? But you don't need permission for every activity. But then sometimes, the law says, in this case, this is when you would need like permission to do this. And once as a developer or as the company you get this authorization, I like to say it's the terms and conditions in which you operate. Okay.
The guiding principles for whatever project that will then get started.
Thank you. Okay, and then now actually, I've spoken so much that I've lost my trail of thought.
No, but it's important because I think the grounding of unpacking the acronyms, but also the legal process that leads up to a mine starting or a property development starting is important. And you've given us a brilliant framework to say it's not just you waking up one day and say, I'm going to build. There's an EIA process, you interact with different stakeholders, there's consultation, and we need that grounding. So it's helpful. It's good.
Okay, I'm glad.
So take us to this case. Tabametsi, you said it was.
Yes. My God, I was like, okay, now we're in throwback. Okay, so Tabametsi came, and it used to be that you were not actually required to do a climate change impact assessment. So you were not actually required to say, okay, I'm going to do this activity, but then what does the impacts of this climate, on climate change, right? And one thing that we actually have to acknowledge is that we know that, the climate harms that are actually happening in the country, and sometimes it's not just about protecting the climate, right? But then sometimes because of the human activity, it adds stresses into communities that are already being impacted. So think about the floods that happen in KZN. Think about the droughts, and all of that is already kind of impacting the environment. So when you actually work to reduce some of the human activities that are worsening climate, you in turn protect Section 24, which is the right to have an environment that is not harmful, which then protects humans, because environmental rights are human rights. So if you think about it that way. Anyway, so Tabametsi was basically saying, no, this is not required. And Earthlife was saying, no, but you need to assess the impacts on climate change. So they went through the whole process where the minister decided to grant it. And one of the litigation was saying that, okay, now can you judicially review this decision? Which
Sure.
means that, okay, so yes, you've granted it.
Okay.
We ran through the EI process. Communities participated saying, hold on, you haven't considered climate change impact here. It moved on. The department was like, oh, but it's not really required. So then the EA was granted, which is the environmental authorization to say you can actually build this, coal-fired power station. And then moved on to saying, okay, no, but we still don't agree with your decision. So now we're asking a judge, can you actually review this decision, right?
Okay. But a judge at which court? Because they're also different.
Or levels of court.
Yes.
Yes, I should have said. Okay, so this one is like the High Court.
Okay, so this would be the High Court for a review of the decision that was made by the government official.
Yes.
Got you.
And then, of course, if you're going to follow that, should I go through the court structure? Because
No.
Okay.
I think that's okay.
Okay. So I was like, maybe I should have started there. Okay. But if, for example, if we do get a decision in the High Court that either party doesn't like, they can review to the SCA and then ultimately the Constitutional Court.
Yes.
But in this case, the review was in the High Court.
Okay.
Yes. And then essentially in the review, you're saying, judge, but Your Honor, can you please look at the decision that was taken by the official? Can you tell us whether it was lawful, was it fair, and was it reasonable? And in this case, was it reasonable to authorize a new power station in the climate that we have, right? That's going to drive climate change. And the court actually agreed that as much as it wasn't required at that point in time to do an assessment, and because of the links that I've kind of shown between climate, human activity, and how ultimately it feeds into Section 24, the judge was like, okay, I'm going to ask the decision to be taken back, that the development, but that the company should then do a proper climate change impact assessment.
Okay.
So what that has meant is that when activities actually begin, they need to actually then do a climate change impact assessment. So how is the activities going to impact climate change?
And that assessment includes community engagement, right? Stakeholder engagements, that's in depth. Does CER guide with that, or is that at the onus of the project?
We actually had to, but initially what's supposed to happen is that we are not supposed to be coming in, right? But then what would happen is that the communities will get, and they'll come back to us and say, but we feel like we still don't understand what the project is. We don't understand, or we've tried to actually raise concerns about these projects and things haven't happened. So what's been happening now as CR is that we have realized that what lies at the heart of it is people just need to know, right? I need to understand the questions to ask at a public participation meeting, and I need to then understand how I can participate, where I can participate, at what stage, because the EIA process is not just once off and then they leave, right? It's they'll first do an assessment, a scoping. Oh, we're just investigating, and then you can participate as a community. It goes back and be oh, we've just done some studies. Here's the draft impact assessment report, which is going to say what we're going to do and how we're going to mitigate that, right? And then the community can participate. Even when it gets to the final kind of report to say we've considered everybody, they can then participate there. But sometimes it's not very clear.
Yeah. But let's talk about that empowerment and empowerment for communities, but also supporting activists in real time, right? You come on board, obviously, from an advisory, advocacy, and legal framework. But what practical ways do you support communities as well as activists? You spoke about literacy, so there's an educational component that comes into the fore as well. But for communities that are actually living and are at the coalface, to use it literally, of climate action and climate justice, what support do you render in supporting activists and empowering communities?
Okay, so we've got different initiatives. So initially it used to be that, especially through our activist support and training program, communities would be can we request training, right? We realize that we think our environmental rights are being violated or infringed here.
Yeah.
Can you come and tell us? Or basically run a workshop or a training workshop. But what we have realized sometimes it is not so easy, to pack up, they only got 4 attorneys to then run workshops throughout the whole country. So one of the initiatives that we do have, it's called the Rights and Remedies course. It is basically because we realize it's quite important for people to understand what their rights are, because when you know what your rights are, then you know how to enforce it, or firstly you know when they've been violated,
and you're empowered.
You're empowered, right? And then you know when actually to be like, okay, I think somebody has done something here, then you can demand accountability or enforcement of your enforcement. So that was the big thing. So this course is, I think, run over like 3 weeks. It's for activists that are already like at the forefront, as you're saying, in the coal communities, that are actually already saying, you know what, I just need to understand, what are the remedies? Like, what are the tools do I have as an activist to then, ensure that my right to Section 24 of my environmental rights are being protected.
So, sorry to interrupt you. So 3 weeks of training in as far as rights and policy regulation, or what does the training entail, basically?
It's very intense. So basically it starts from like very basic, like when it comes to like National Water Act, like the acts, right, the different laws.
Nice.
So Section 24, or maybe let's start with the Constitution. So it's like the Constitution. In terms of the Constitution, very broadly, what are my rights? What flows from there? And then goes from NEMA, this big environmental law. What are the rights in there? And when those rights are violated, what are the remedies? One of the remedies is like basically, like I think the strongest, not the strongest, but one of the tools that I really like and communities can use is called Section 24, duty of care. So anybody who actually is going to do something to the environment that's going to impact in some way. So you've got a duty of care if your activities are going to harm the environment. And sorry, let me just go back a bit. But Section 24's duty of care says that anyone who foresees that the activities might impact the environment or does impact the environment, then they've got a duty to actually do something about it.
Got you.
Right? So that is kind of very basic. But I wish I had my NEMA, because then I'll read it out. But there's one thing that, like, when communities can see all this activity is doing, you can immediately call upon the government. Hey, somebody's doing this. You need to actually kind of correct what you're doing. So that's like one thing that comes out of NEMA. And then also it's like, I think similar things exist in, for example, the National Water Act and even the Waste Act. So what can I do that say there's a right here that's been violated, then what is my remedy? So the most important thing that comes out of that is like, what are my rights? What are my remedies?
And that knowledge base is so important, just from an activist standpoint, to say, I'm aware of what is wrong and right, and these are the levers that I have from a legal standpoint. So it's 3 weeks, it's intense, but I feel like the value add has a ripple effect, right? Because they then go back to their different constituencies and different organizations and enforce and empower them.
Absolutely. And I think this year, so I'm not really part of the organizing, but I know the attorneys also are starting to think activists also need self-care, right?
Yes.
So how do you kind of manage it as an activist? And also there's things about like access to information. It's quite important in like an activist can I say journey to understand, okay, what documents can I demand? When can I actually say, you know what, actually I need access to this information for me to then understand whether my rights have been violated. And one way is that you realize that, okay, it's been 10 years, maybe you're not part of the public participation process when that mine started. So then how do I then get access to that document to then say, hey, but you're not complying with your authorization here because you're doing activities that you're not authorized. So that's basically what R&R is. We then have what we're calling Ask Arabo. Because we can't have 3 weeks of everybody, but now we've got what we call Ask Karabo. This is a educational advocacy tool.
Ask Karabo.
Yes, pretty much. So it's an initiative that CR realized that you can actually just go onto the platform and then basically ask any question on your environmental rights. Because also sometimes we realize that environmental laws are very complex, they're very complicated, and sometimes you just want a quick answer. Okay, you know what? I think my rights have been violated here. Is this a violation of my environmental rights? Or if it's a violation, where do I report the violation, which is very important. And if I've reported the violation, then, what can I expect to happen? So that's kind of basically, what we do as Ask Arabo, but it's like a platform where people are meant to actually ask questions. And I think what is meant between R&R and Ask Arabo is basically to give people like kind of information, clear, simple, accurate generate information about the environmental rights.
Yes.
And then what also, another initiative is called the Environmental Violations Portal.
Okay.
So yes, now you know your rights, you know when they've been violated, but where do you report it, right? And so when you actually go into this platform, it'll tell you, okay, so I suspect that there's a violation here. And then you go into the platform and then you click at which department you want to kind of report the violation.
Okay.
What used to happen is that people wouldn't know where to report, right? You see there's a problem here, you know there's an issue, but then, okay, who do I tell? And then sometimes they'll be reporting to the wrong department, which doesn't really help.
And then causes a delay as well.
It causes a delay. And sometimes, to be honest, I do think like... there are not enough inspectors, and they're not going to go back to you be like, hey, by the way, you reported to the wrong department. They might just be like, okay, this is not our issue, and then move on to the next one. And you realize that I've been waiting and nothing has happened. So it actually just helps to facilitate like reporting. So the reporting of violations. So I think what we were trying to do with all these tools rather was to say, know what your environmental rights are. And then when you know what the environmental rights are, then you know when to kind of assess and understand how to gather like kind of the evidence, and then you could then use it to report, right? But when you report, you can either report directly to department or you can use the Environmental Violations Portal. However, you realize that there's also activists that have been in the space for a while, and they're like, I need stronger tools. What do I need to do? And then the Rights and Remedies course is meant to actually do that. And it's supposed to be like a well-rounded kind of course. I keep saying course, but course.
yes,
to ensure that they actually understand their rights and remedies.
That's incredibly helpful, because then it's also at a practical level where you aren't necessarily being gatekept from interacting with the law, right? You have it at your fingertips. You go onto the tools, you go online, you go onto your website, and that helps activists or people that are doing the work in real time. But I do want to shift a little bit and talk about some of the lessons that you as CER and Dimakatso have encountered. I think sometimes people see law as this fixed structure or institution that is unmoved, but the reality is that it's static. It's constantly changing. You spoke about the Climate Act as well. I wonder, what lessons have you encountered, or CER as an organization encountered, around the iterative process of climate law? We have the Climate Act, but also the influence of the just energy transition informing policy and informing laws. What are some of the lessons that you've encountered in that space? And do you think there's opportunity to change some of the laws that we have?
Absolutely. I think that's the whole... law is supposed to regulate context and regulate behavior. It's supposed to kind of manage kind of how we interact with each other, with the state, and how the state interacts with us. So I actually think that the whole point of litigation, or people actually using the law, is to kind of test, right? Give substance to Section 24. Or give life to it, rather. Let me put it that way. Because yes, you could say everybody's got a right to a healthy environment, and you leave it at that, and it'll forever be existing in books, and you realize that nothing ever happens with it. But if you're saying, you know what, you've got this right, and then you actually test it out, so meaning you demand it. I demand as Dimakatso that you respect my right to a healthy environment. And when that doesn't work, it's almost like that thing where you're constantly saying, okay, I want transparency when it comes to certain things, right? Because then I want to access my right to healthy environment. If that is blocked, litigation can provide that, where it gives clarity under what circumstances do you then can get access to certain documents. Or, for example, what I mentioned with the Tabameti case, where people are saying that you never needed to actually consider climate impact, but then through litigation and through an organization and community say no, but you actually should, because we are feeling the ripple effects of that. And so now the law came in and say, okay, so maybe let's clarify under what circumstances are you supposed to have a climate change impact assessment, and if you're going to have it, what type of it, it's supposed to be a comprehensive one, right, that sets that out. And I think also you can actually use the law to also hold people accountable, right? You might realize that, so one of the lessons was people say you participate, but people thought participation with communities just meant, okay, let me just tell you what the project is and then leave.
Or what we're here to do.
What you had to do, and then we leave. And then for them, according to them, that was participation. But the courts, or through somebody saying, but we think you should be meaningfully consulting us, right? And what does meaningful consultation mean? And I think that's actually what the laws, or rather the courts or litigation, have done in some of the lessons, is that I think for me, it provides clarity. It can provide like substance to what the law is, and can actually be a very empowering, I think, tool. What, for example, now with a lot of the effects that climate change is having, that the floods, can we then go after polluters and say, you should not have been doing this, and because of that, we need to be compensated, because it's through your actions that we are being impacted as communities. So I feel like the more communities know what their rights are, the more they demand accountability, then I think the stronger this law becomes. And I think I just want to go back to what I've said at the beginning. Then it means that you actually protect your rights, not just for us now, but for people that are yet to come, right? Because if we do nothing, it's just going to exist as words on a page.
And the words on the page then translate into people's realities that maybe they haven't been consulted on, right? But we're having a huge drive and a move away from fossil fuels. And the just energy transition is proliferating different spaces and different sectors. I wonder, do you think there's a concerted effort from the legal fraternity in being aware of that move and consulting communities, but also speaking with private sector and heavy industries around it? And what role do you think you yourselves, the CER, play in that space?
Oh, no, thanks for that. I think I remember what I wanted to say also.
Yes.
I think what's been happening. Okay, I think the unique thing about CER is that, initially we are lawyers, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's through communities or, people coming to us and say, I think my rights have been violated here. I'm not part of the conversations around, let's say, it hasn't happened yet, but let's say for like the just transition, for example, they say, okay, we want to move away from, fossil fuels, we want to have a renewable, but then you don't actually talk to people on the ground. So they might come to me and be like, this thing is happening, this conversation is happening. I know obviously just transition is not law yet, right? So it's not like it doesn't exist in statutes where you can be like, hey, section whatever of this act say, when you do it, a just transition, you need to consult people. But then this is, and I think the whole point of it being a just transition is that there's been a lot of transitions that's been happening, right? Or that have happened in South Africa.
100%.
But then what makes it just? It means you take people with you, right? You take people with you through like meaningful dialogue, meaningful engagement. Because you might say, okay, we're just going to transition now, and then realize, what about the workers, right? What about the communities that are actually living next to like those mines, that actually have families that then work in the coal mines or in the power stations, and so this is just meant to say, take people with you, and a CR is saying, we actually demanding that you actually take people with you so that it's actually just as you transition. And also one thing that I would say personally, but it's I think it was 2 weeks back, we were talking in a community meeting, and I didn't even think about having socially owned, for example, renewable energy. And people were saying that yes, we do want to transition, because think about the Highveld. People are saying we're getting sick. We definitely understand, okay, we want to transition. And even with that power, we realize that people are being impacted by the power stations and the coal mines, yet they themselves can't even access that power, can't even buy the electricity. So now they were saying that we can transition, but we can't transition from another system to another one that is still not going to be just for us. And they were proposing, as part of that, can't we have a socially owned, renewable kind of power where it's owned by the community, which is something that you need to consider. But you can only consider that if you actually are talking to the people on the ground. And when with a CR, we're saying, give people that information, give people that knowledge, that understanding, so they themselves can actually make the decision. Don't come at the end of everything and say, you know what, oh, by the way, we've transitioned. And so we're telling you what this transition is. And also we have to recognize that we've got different people that have different interests. So then how do we elevate communities also to be part of that dialogue and that kind of space?
I think what I appreciate is also the reality that you're not dealing with passive communities. They're very aware. They also know what levers are available, but they also need that empowerment aspect that says, wait, there are different ways of doing this. If we're owning an IPP or renewable energy project, how are we the custodians and the stewards of it, of taking it from a sustainability standpoint and not necessarily being talked down or consulted as just the community? So I love that there's also that interaction happening in real time. A huge part of the reason why we have this show is also making sure that justice is embedded in the conversations we have around climate. And of course, there's this confluence between justice and the law, what is just, what is unjust. And I wonder, as CER, what are some of the cases that you've had to work on where justice hasn't been embedded or has been neglected in some of the work that you do for environmental rights?
Okay, so the case that I want to mention is called Deadly Air.
Deadly Air.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was basically brought by two organizations that were demanding that the minister kind of enact what you call a high-felt priority plan. And this was supposed to manage and reduce the air pollution in the high-felt. And then it's because like communities have been seeing over the years that we're getting sick, right? And because of the air pollution that is caused by industry within our communities. And also the department had recognized that people are actually getting sick. Nobody was denying this. But then what was missing was that enforcement, right? And so communities had to use litigation to actually then compel the minister to kind of pass these regulations that would then kind of have the effect of like industry, you need to reduce your regulations so that we can then manage the air pollution.
How long ago was this? Sorry, Dimakatso. How long ago was this?
Oh, gosh. I feel like it was 2015 when that judgment, but even before that, communities have been, fighting, but have been trying to get this passed for the 10 years before that. Wow. So it's not like, and I think that's something sometimes people miss. By the time we get to court, they think that we just ran straight to court. But then you realize that communities have been trying to get, first it was like a recognition that we're getting sick here. And what has come up also in the Val was that, not just the Val, but also in the Highveld, I was in Middelburg, they thought actually having asthma was just something that happens in the family. Like when somebody said that, I was a bit, caught off guard, because you think it's a family sickness, but no, it's because I actually live in the area that I live. And also what makes things worse is that sometimes you realize when you go to like clinics, they advise you to move, but then how do you move when you don't actually have like access to money or like jobs? And it also impacts children a lot, right? And even the people that work there, a mine comes, they'll be like, oh, we're going to hire you. You get there, you realize you're too sick to actually work in the mines because you've got asthma. But anyway, I think I'm going in a bit of a tangent. So the communities essentially were saying that this is a violation of our Section 24 right? Because we're living in an environment that is actually harmful to our health and well-being. The judge or the court agreed. And I think what is very important about that, it made it immediately realizable. So now it's no longer something that will progressively happen. It means actually now people can demand their right to a healthy environment at the moment. Yeah.
As we wind down, I do want to do a bit of a deep dive from a personal standpoint, speaking to you as Dimakatso. Why is this work important? Why does it matter to you? You're a legal activist. You're in the space of like holding accountability, but also making sure that empowerment is done. Why is this work important to you?
Okay, so I guess I want to start by saying that let me say this. Obviously, I'm not going to go like too far back because I think that will have another
go as far back as you want.
I think it's actually going into those communities. Like I feel like a lot of times I think we don't actually talk to the people that live in communities that are impacted, right? That are living next to coal mines, that are living next to power stations, that are living next to actually any mine, that are living next to abandoned mines. We firstly don't go there. We don't see kind of the circumstances they're living, in. And then secondly, we actually don't talk to people, like talk to them and try to understand. And so I think for me, what makes me an activist lawyer is actually, how do we stand with and support communities in fighting for or realizing their Section 24 right? Because sometimes I think people, when somebody wakes up and be like, oh, now there's ash on my car, or there's ash or coal ash on my, clothes, or the fact that my house is cracking. Because recently I was in Emelo, And I was talking to like a kind of a grandfather, can I say grandfather? But they used to work the coal mine, and then they got a house. He built this house for his grandchildren. I think his daughter had passed away, so now he's living with the grandchildren. His house is cracking right now because of blasting, right? And so he's like, I don't have money to fix this. I don't have money to relocate, so what do I do, right? So it's a clear violation. So I think what keeps me going is that I want to stand with and support people that are demanding accountability in their communities. And I also... that are actually doing something to kind of remedy like climate, injustices that are happening in their communities. So I think that's what is motivating me and what keeps me going. And I think also I don't want to also end up like when I'm old and I realize that there's floods and I just have no power at that point in time. And I hope at that point we're progressed to a point where can I say things are better, but I don't know, like, because I used to work around like a lot around water advocacy, and then I stepped away to come back 10 years later to realize things have gotten worse. I hope that's not going to happen when it comes to things like like just transition. We're going to get at the end of the transition and realize it wasn't just, and because of that now we have to deal with the impacts or the what's currently happening. So I hope that doesn't happen. And then I think also, like, with food security, if you protect the environment, we get food security, people can like eat, people can, live in ways where they can sustain themselves, because just transition doesn't mean just about the energy.
Correct.
I know we do talk a lot about the energy, which is very important. But then how do we then influence other transitions that are happening around the just energy transition? But I think did I answer your question? Because I feel like now I'm getting too reflective and I'm like, gosh, like
this book is really important. No, you have, and I think it's a beautiful reminder of why you do the work that you do, but also the real impact. I think the story you shared about Umkhulu, the grandfather, to say even as a mine worker, he's now still dealing with the impacts of the work that he did. Even with trying to find some sort of sustainability through the house and raising his grandchildren, but the impacts of blasting are now impacting his house, and so it's incumbent for us to also be aware that it's bigger than just one thing. It's a multiplier effect of communities, of livelihoods, of sustainability, and workers that are looking after their families. And so thank you for that. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that's how we close off this episode of Just a Say, a really rich conversation around the legal frameworks that we have as a country, but also the importance on how we use them in making sure that climate action and climate justice is embedded in the work that we do. From myself, Sintle, and the team, thank you.